On the morning of April 18th, 1906, a woman in the Hayes Valley neighborhood of San Francisco decided to make breakfast. Her house was still standing. Her family was hungry. The shaking had stopped hours earlier. So she lit her stove, and the chimney above that stove, cracked from top to bottom by the earthquake, poured her fire straight into the walls of her own home. That fire has a name in the historical record. They called it the Ham and Eggs Fire. It burned City Hall down to a bare iron skeleton. It ate its way outward through block after block of the center of the city, and it merged with the wall of flame already coming from the east. All of it beginning with a breakfast that never should have been cooked. And here is the part that should stop you cold. That fire was not unusual. It was one of more than 50 separate fires burning in San Francisco that same morning. When the city finally stopped burning 3 days later, the people who counted the losses reached a conclusion that has been quietly buried under a century of grainy newsreel footage and museum captions. The earthquake did not destroy San Francisco. The fire did. And some of that fire, the city lit itself, on purpose, with explosives while it was trying to save the place. Here are the numbers, and I want you to sit with them for a moment, because they are the entire story. Roughly 28,000 buildings destroyed, 490 city blocks gone, more than 5 square miles of a modern American city reduced to standing chimneys and ash and an empty street grid. Now, here is the split. The insurance investigators and engineers who went through that wreckage put the share of damage caused directly by ground shaking at somewhere around 10 to 20%. Everything else, roughly 80 cents of every dollar lost, was fire. Think about what that actually means. If the earthquake had struck exactly as it did, and every fire had been extinguished that same morning, San Francisco would have been a badly damaged city. Cracked walls, collapsed cheap hotels on soft ground south of Market Street, a very frightened population. It would not have been an ash field. It would not have needed to be rebuilt from the dirt up. So, why was it not put out? Because the earthquake did 3 things in under a minute that made firefighting almost impossible. And then human beings did a 4th thing that made it very much worse. The first thing the earthquake did was break the water. San Francisco's water arrived through pipes that crossed the San Andreas Fault itself, then ran across soft-filled ground along the bay shore. When the fault moved, those pipes snapped. Inside the city limits, something like 300 separate breaks opened in the distribution mains. Firefighters dragged hose to hydrants in the burning districts and got nothing, or got a trickle that died in their hands. The city had once maintained a network of underground cisterns for exactly this scenario. By 1906, most of them had been neglected, forgotten, or paved over. The second thing the earthquake did was kill the one man who had seen all of this coming. Dennis Sullivan was the fire chief of San Francisco, and he was not a careless man. He had spent years arguing that his city sat inside a trap, wooden buildings packed shoulder to shoulder for miles, a water supply that came from far away over unstable ground. He had drawn up a plan for an auxiliary saltwater system that could pull directly from the bay when the mains failed. The city did not fund it. At 12 minutes past 5 that morning, the dome of the California Hotel, next door to his fire station on Bush Street, collapsed. It came down through the roof of the quarters where Sullivan and his wife were sleeping, and it carried him through the floors below. He never fought the fire. He died 4 days later. San Francisco lost its most experienced fire officer in the first seconds of the disaster, before a single flame had even been reported. The third thing was simply the hour. Wood stoves and coal ranges being lit for breakfast in a city of 400,000 people, gas lines that were now open pipes venting into open air, and a wind that would rise off the bay as the day warmed. And the fourth thing, the part that gets left out of nearly every retelling, is that the city chose to fight the fire with explosives. I want to be careful and fair here, because the men who made that decision were not fools and they were not villains. When you have no water, and a fire front is moving through wooden buildings, the one tool left to you is to remove the fuel. You destroy a row of structures ahead of the flames, and the fire arrives at that gap and finds nothing to burn. Fire breaks by demolition are a real technique. Under the right conditions, they work. These were not the right conditions. And for the first 2 days, they did not even have the right explosive. The city's supply of dynamite ran short almost immediately. So, crews began using black powder instead. And black powder does not do what dynamite does. Dynamite shatters. Black powder pushes. It throws flaming timber and burning fabric and hot debris outward in every direction. Into the street. Onto the roofs opposite. Into buildings that were not yet burning at all. Eyewitness accounts and later investigations describe exactly this happening again and again. A demolition crew clearing a fire break and starting 3 new fires doing it. And in many cases, the crews doing this had no training in demolition whatsoever. Soldiers and volunteers were handed explosives and told to open a line. Some dropped charges into buildings that still held furniture and curtains and stores of alcohol. On one block, a drugstore was blown apart and its contents ignited instantly. The destruction of Chinatown, one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in the United States at the time, was accelerated by this. So was the loss of the produce district. Historians who have gone back through the fire department, records, and the military reports land in the same uncomfortable place. For roughly the first 48 hours, the demolition effort spread more fire than it stopped. But I owe you the other half of that, because it is not a simple story. And there is one place where the explosives absolutely unambiguously worked. That place is Van Ness Avenue. Van Ness was a boulevard, 125 feet across, lined with the mansions of the wealthiest families in San Francisco. And by the 3rd day of the fire, it was the last line the city had left. If the flames crossed Van Ness, the entire western half of San Francisco was finished. So the army and the fire crews blew up the mansions. Dozens of them. Some of the finest houses in the American West were destroyed deliberately. Several of them with their owners standing on the sidewalk watching it happen. Combined with a shift in the wind and with crews who by then had learned bitterly what they were doing, the Van Ness line held. Everything west of that street survived. Hundreds of thousands of people live today in neighborhoods that exist because those houses were sacrificed. So the honest verdict on the dynamite is not that it was a catastrophe, and it is not that it saved the city. It is both, in that order. And the difference between the two was training, the correct explosive, and time the city did not have on the first morning. Now, let me back up and tell you what actually happened underground, because the earthquake itself has been shrunk in public memory down to a few seconds of rattling, and it deserves better than that. At 12 minutes past 5 in the morning, the northern section of the San Andreas Fault let go. The rupture started offshore near the Golden Gate and tore in both directions along the fault line. North past Point Reyes and on toward Cape Mendocino, and south down towards San Juan Bautista. By the time it stopped, roughly 296 miles of the Earth's crust had moved. The magnitude is estimated at about 7.9. The shaking in San Francisco lasted somewhere between 45 and 60 seconds, which is an extraordinarily long time to be standing on ground that is behaving like water. It was felt from southern Oregon down to Los Angeles and inland into central Nevada. And the fault did something you can still go and look at with your own eyes. It slid sideways. The land west of the fault moved north relative to the land east of it. And near Point Reyes, the offset reached about 20 feet. A fence that had run in one straight line across a pasture on the 17th of April was, on the 18th, 2 separate fences, with a 20-foot jog between them. There is a spot in Marin County where you can walk that offset today. That single detail changed science permanently. A geologist named Andrew Lawson led a state commission that mapped the entire rupture and published a report in 1908 that remains one of the great documents of Earth science. And working from that data, a scientist named Harry Fielding Reid proposed the idea that finally explained what an earthquake actually is. He called it elastic rebound. The 2 sides of a fault are being dragged past one another by the slow grinding of tectonic plates, but friction locks them together. The rock does not simply refuse to move, it bends. It stores the strain the way a stick does when you slowly bend it. And then at some point, the friction loses, and the rock snaps back into shape, and everything stored in that bending comes out at once as seismic waves. Every earthquake you have ever felt is that. A stick bending quietly for decades, and then not bending anymore. We learned that from San Francisco. And there is one more thing that came out of 1906, and it is the part that people find hardest to believe. In the years afterward, the city worked very hard to convince the world that the earthquake had not really been the point. San Francisco in 1906 was in direct competition with Los Angeles, with Seattle, with every other Western port for investment in immigrants and railroad money. And the business community understood something immediately. Fire is a thing that can happen to any city. Chicago burned, Boston burned, fire is bad luck. An earthquake, though, is a permanent property of the ground itself, and if the world decided that San Francisco sat on ground that does that, the money would simply go elsewhere. So, the event was quietly renamed. In civic promotion, in insurance correspondence, in railroad advertising, it became the Great Fire. And many insurance policies of the era covered fire while excluding earthquake, which handed property owners their own powerful reason to insist that flames, and not the ground, had done the damage. There are documented cases of owners setting damaged but standing buildings alight deliberately, so the claim would be a fire claim. The death toll received the same treatment. The official figure released at the time was 375, later adjusted upward to about 478. That number stood as the accepted record for decades. It was also, quite simply, wrong. A San Francisco city archivist named Gladys Hansen spent much of her working life going through death records, burial records, hospital registers, and newspaper accounts, hunting for the people who had been left out. Chinese residents whose deaths went unrecorded because Chinatown's records burned, and because the city did not count them the same way. Refugees who died later in the camps. People buried where they fell in the first hours. Her work pushed the estimate to at least 3,000, and she believed the real figure is higher than that. 3,000 dead makes 1906 the deadliest natural disaster in the history of the state of California, and for most of the 20th century, the official record said 478. So, is it going to happen again? This is where I am going to disappoint the doom headlines, because this channel does not do fake countdowns. Here is what the science actually says. The United States Geological Survey ran a very large study of the Bay Area fault system, and the headline number is this. There is roughly a 72% probability of at least one magnitude 6.7 or greater earthquake striking the San Francisco Bay Area within a 30-year window. That is a high number, and it is the one you usually hear shouted. But look closely at what it is measuring. Magnitude 6.7 is a serious, damaging, enormously expensive earthquake. It is not 1906. 1906 was 7.9, and because the magnitude scale is not linear, 7.9 releases something on the order of 60 times the energy of a 6.7. The probability of a full repeat of 1906, meaning a rupture of that entire northern San Andreas segment within the next 30 years, is low. Most estimates place it in the single digits, and there is a reason for that. And it is one of the more elegant findings in modern seismology. When that fault released in 1906, it did not only shake the city, it unloaded stress across a very wide region. Earthquake rates around the bay dropped sharply afterward and stayed unusually low through most of the 20th century. Seismologists call this a stress shadow. That shadow is now generally considered to be fading, and the segment that broke in 1906 has spent the last century slowly rebuilding strain it gave away in under a minute. It is not finished, and it never will be. The fault most seismologists actually watch in the Bay Area is not the San Andreas at all. It is the Hayward fault, which runs directly beneath Oakland, Berkeley, Hayward, and Fremont, straight through some of the most densely built ground in the western United States. It last produced a major earthquake in 1868. Its average interval between large events is roughly 150 years. We are past that. So, 3 futures. Future 1, and this is by far the most likely for any given year. Nothing happens. The faults keep creeping and locking and storing strain. A moderate quake rattles the dishes now and then. The news runs a graphic, and life goes on. This is what almost every year in the Bay Area looks like. Future 2, the realistic one, a magnitude 6.7 to 7.0 on the Hayward fault. Scenario modeling for that event puts losses in the hundreds of billions of dollars, with tens of thousands of buildings rendered unlivable, and with water systems broken again across the East Bay. Not a city erased, but a region that struggles for a very long time. Future 3, the rare one, the northern San Andreas goes again at something close to 1906 scale. Low probability in any 30-year window, but never zero because that fault has done it before and it will do it again eventually. The difference is that San Francisco is not the city it was. It has a high-pressure auxiliary water system, built specifically because of 1906, fed by the bay and by maintained underground cisterns. It has fireboats that pump seawater into the streets. It has building codes written in the wreckage of everything that has happened since. The fire would not run the way it ran in 1906, and that is not optimism, that is engineering. Here is my honest opinion. After everything the research shows, 1906 is not a story about the power of nature. It is a story about the shaking being the easy part. The earthquake broke the water, killed the fire chief, and lit 50 fires in one morning. And then absolutely everything that turned a damaged city into a destroyed one was human decision-making under pressure, with no plan, no training, and no honest accounting afterward. The ground did what ground does. The catastrophe was built on top of it by people. And I think that is actually the hopeful reading, because decisions are the part we control. San Francisco's real answer to 1906 was not a prayer, and it was not a prediction. It was a second water system that does not care whether the first one survives. That is why I do not lie awake about the next one the way I would have in 1905. The fault is exactly as strong as it ever was. We are simply far less flammable. Now, I want to hear from you, and this one is a memory question. When you first learned about 1906 in a classroom or from a film or from an older relative, what did you picture destroying San Francisco? Did anyone ever tell you it was mostly fire? Or did you spend years, the way most of us did, imagining buildings falling down? Tell me in the comments, because I suspect that quiet renaming worked better and lasted longer than anyone who did it ever intended. If this was worth your time, a like genuinely helps this channel reach people who would otherwise never see it. And subscribe, because the next one goes much wider. Everything we have looked at so far, San Andreas, Cascadia, Alaska, Hawaii, and now San Francisco, is one arc of a single enormous structure that circles the entire Pacific Ocean. In the next video, I am going to walk that ring from one end to the other and show you the one section of it that has stayed quiet for so long that the silence itself is the reason scientists cannot stop watching it. The ground beneath America is speaking. Make sure you are listening.